All right. Well, welcome to Marin Coalition, everyone. My name is Scott Pinsky. If you are here for the first time, we thank you for trying us out. We're here to hear from Rhea Suh, the CEO of the Marin Community Foundation, and I'll be introducing her in a second. I think we just lost our lights. Is that power failure? You turned them off? Oh, no, I don't care. Just wondering if we have an emergency here. Okay, well, let's get going. Let me just tell you a little bit about our group if you're here for the first time. I know some of you are. Marin Coalition is a nonprofit 501c3 organization here in Marin County, established 50 years ago. So happy anniversary to us. We present what we call conversations that matter on topics of interest to the Marin community. The impact we've had over these many decades, we hope, is a significant one. We hope to keep going for another 50 years. And if you'd like to support our project and help ensure that we continue operating, you're welcome to go to our website and support us with a donation of any amount. You can go to Marin Coalition, that's all one word, .org. And you'll find all our past programs, future programs. Everything should be on the website, which Alan maintains. It's a pretty good website for a little nonprofit like us. And also, I should point out, some people aren't aware, but we have all of our past programs, which we record. Those are available for viewing anytime, day or night, by anybody who has a computer for absolutely no cost, just by going to our website and you click on the archives page. That'll take you to a list of dates, and then you can find the program that you want to hear, click on it, and you can watch the program at your leisure. So if you want to hear what Damon Connolly said last month, for example, if you couldn't get here, you can go click on that and watch the entire program, or go back 5 years and see what we did with Jared Huffman back in the COVID days. Anyway, so we have a lot of information. I won't belabor it any further. As far as future programs, we don't have anything scheduled. We're probably going to be on our summer hiatus from this point forward until the fall. There is a possibility we may have some pop-up programs that might come up. If so, we'll let everyone know by email. And if you're on our email list, you don't need to do anything. If you're not on the email list and you would like to be notified of our programs, see either me or Alan afterward, just give us your email and your bank account number and password, and we'll be happy to, no, just kidding. Just give us your email and we'll put you on the list. All right, let's go ahead and silence our cell phones as we get going. The Marin Community Foundation first opened its doors in January of 1987 with the responsibility to steward and distribute the Leonard and Beryl Buck Foundation funds. In the years since, it has evolved into one of the country's largest and most successful community foundations, housing over 850 charitable funds established by individuals, families, and organizations. Today's guest, Rhea Suh, has served as CEO since 2021, having succeeded Dr. Thomas Peters. Before I give you more on Rhea, let me introduce others from Marin Community Foundation that are here with her. Vicki Garrett, if I'm saying that right, the Chief of Staff is here. Ann Atkinson, Assistant to the President and CEO. And I'm sorry, I've already forgotten your name.
Ebony Marshall.
Ebony Marshall is also here as well. So thank you all for joining us. Let me tell you about Rhea. She has more than 25 years of philanthropic, environmental, and public policy experience. Prior to MCF, she served as president of the NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council, which under her leadership grew by more than $50 million and increased its membership by more than 40%. Before NRDC, she served as President Obama's Assistant Secretary for Policy, Management, and Budget at the U.S. Department of the Interior. Prior to that, she worked at both the David and Lucille Packard Foundation and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, focusing on strategies dedicated to environmental conservation and clean energy. She earned her bachelor's degree in environmental science from Barnard College and received a Fulbright fellowship to Seoul, South Korea. She also earned a master's degree in education, administration, planning, and social policy from Harvard University. Rhea has described her mission at MCF as determining how the organization can use the resources of philanthropy to both solve society's biggest challenges and simultaneously build community. It is her view that now is the time for community foundations to fully come into their own with their unique combination of strategic heft and truly local knowledge necessary to get to the heart of our most persistent problems. Today, we'll have the opportunity to discover what MCF is doing in Marin to help set a vibrant, thoughtful path for the future of our community. It's my honor to welcome Rhea Suh.
I don't know. I'll hear you. How about that? Yeah, thanks. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. It's really just a pleasure and an honor to have this space and the time to have all you together. Hopefully get to know you a little bit more through the next hour or so. I have prepared remarks, but I want to preface them with a significant acknowledgement that I really want this presentation / conversation to be something that's useful and interesting to you. And so even as I go through the presentation, I know there's like a question and answer period that was reserved at the end. I don't mind at all to kind of get questions throughout. And again, I'm kind of happy to take this in any direction that you might find interesting or might be curious about. So let me just maybe start before I get into the presentation itself by providing just a little bit more context as to kind of how I ended up in my role at the Marin Community Foundation and in Marin County generally. I actually am a Westerner, but not a West Coaster by birth. I was born and raised in Boulder, Colorado, where I spent all of my childhood. And throughout college and my kind of early professional life, kind of moved around the country quite a bit, from San Francisco to DC to New York, and back and forth. But about 30, almost 40 years ago, my parents, when they were retiring in Colorado, decided to move out to California, which was their original home, coming here as immigrants to the United States to go to graduate school at Cal. And so this was their first kind of American home, and they've always considered it a part of kind of their own identity. And so they were probably the only family that moved from Colorado to California to retire, but they did so, and they chose Mill Valley, of all places, to spend their golden years. So while I had significant experience as a Bay Area resident, I had never lived in Marin outside of obviously visiting my parents for many years. Until about 3.5 years ago. And so I moved here to take this job. And moved from a place that was probably the most polar opposite place to Mill Valley that you could think of, which was Brooklyn, New York. And so even though I had some sense of kind of Marin, it was a very big culture shock for a lot of different reasons to move from New York to Marin County. But I will say, after having been here now for more than 3.5 years, it really is an amazing place to call home, and I feel very fortunate to be able to call it home. And increasingly, it really does feel like home. And home is kind of a theme that I want to touch upon here and there throughout my presentation, because I think it's something that matters to all of us, right? We think of home almost immediately, that evokes a lot of different emotions, in many cases, positive emotions. When you think about home, you also think about place. And when you think about place, you think about community. So for a community foundation, of which the Marin Community Foundation is one of 900 throughout the country, community is a really important concept. But when you actually kind of take the word community out and think about it, what does community actually mean? How do we define community as a people? How do we define community as a people in a place? And Marin presents a really interesting challenge when you try to grapple with this question of like, how do we define community here in Marin? I mean, I'm just happy to open it up to the crowd. How do you define community? Sure.
It's who we fighting with.
That neighbor who's banging too loud in the morning. Okay, it's who you fight with. Sir.
I think community is common, the common ground, the things we have to share.
The commons. Incredibly important. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I think from the Marine Mammal Center, I also think about animals around us, so
Mhm.
it's our ecosystem, and it's how we impact each other, and both proximity and then also influence.
Fascinating. Love that.
As your partner organization from Wild Care. I would say that we also think, for me, community is about this beautiful place we all get to call home.
Yes.
And sort of the obligation we all have to keep it the way it is, right? We're so lucky to live here, and a lot of that's because of the nature and the animals and the people that we get to live with.
Indeed.
Sort of the same thing, I think of it as the things that we share in common as opposed to the things that divide.
Yeah, commonality. Bonds. Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking of it as a evolving ecosystem that, because I've been here, well, geez, since '56 in California. And I chose Marin because of its ecosystem, the beauty. Of course, I worked in Yosemite, so that makes a difference.
The singularity of what's special about this place.
Well, to me, community, it means people coming together to help each other, to thrive, to move towards our, our more unity.
So this kind of living ecosystem of both humans and other life forms, and the bonds that connects us both through proximity, but the bonds that are created in terms of obligation and responsibility, opportunity.
I think community is an acceptance of diversity and new people coming to join us in ways that will enrich and enhance our communities. Be very open and welcoming. Yes.
Indeed, just going back to the ecosystem kind of example, the most thriving ecosystems are the ones that have the most diversity.
And also how we share developing our children and nurturing our children together, because we're here together physically.
Takes a village. Yeah, I have a 14-year-old daughter that has a middle school dance tonight, and I am hosting 12 girls over to do their makeup. And I will tell you that really takes a village, so definitely rely on lots of other help tonight to get me through that evening.
A little different, we have the Castro Valley Landowners Association, so we're all over the place in the Castro Valley. But that's what joins us together.
Right.
And we have board members and so forth, and that served on different committees for the county too, so enjoyed that.
It's lovely.
Even though we're not close knit like that.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a community.
Exactly. So.
I think by listening and asking questions as you're doing what you're talking about, building community here at the root. You trickster.
I promise, I'm actually a terrible musician and there's nothing up my sleeves, but I really appreciate that comment. It was not frankly intended. And like I said, I'm kind of trying to figure out how to tailor my remarks to make it most meaningful to all of you. But this question of community and how one thinks about community, I think is not only profoundly important to an institution like the Marin Community Foundation, but I think is an increasingly important question for us as Americans, right? What does it mean, right? To be in community? What are our responsibilities? What are our challenges? What are our opportunities? What are our mutual obligations? What are our potential collective hopes? And I think all of those things are things that we're really wrestling with, and maybe we always have been, but certainly we're at a unique moment in American history around what those things actually mean and how they ultimately kind of reside in our values and in our behaviors and theoretically in the actions that our governments support. So I think it's quite interesting. And when I think about it more within the context of, again, the community foundation and certainly in the things that we've thought about as a community foundation, Marin is all the things that you said. And this, it was just a wonderful exercise. So thank you so much for everybody who's raised your hands and spoken. Just it confirms so much more and in such deep way how uniquely special this community is. But trying to figure out kind of how to get our arms around everything that is Marin is in some ways still challenging. Marin is really interesting if you just look at it from a kind of topographical perspective, and you talked about Nicasio Valley. It's pretty spread out. I mean, it's a small county, but it's spread out, and you kind of have little villages here or there. You have kind of identities in places like Southern Marin versus Northern Marin. You have identities in places like I live in San Rafael versus I live in Corte Madera. And yet, when we think about these questions of collective aspiration, we are organized as a county, at least from a governmental perspective and a services perspective, we are organized by this geographic bounding. And within that geographic bounding, then, you know, the questions become, what does the community need and how can we best support that? And Marin presents, again, a lot of really unique both challenges and opportunities, geographically dispersed in many ways, and yet sometimes very hyper concentrated and local. As many of you know, Marin is one of the smallest counties in the state of California. It's one of the wealthiest counties in the state of California. I think it's the county that has the fastest growing aging population in the state of California. And for almost 20 years, if not longer, it has also kind of been the top of the charts on being the most segregated county in the state of California, right? So these kind of deep pockets of poverty, in some cases of social isolation, are also facets of this community, right? And if we are to think of ourselves as a community, regardless of whether you live in one of these pockets, it becomes, again, a collective responsibility. These, again, you're following kind of my logic here, right? So as a community foundation who's responsible for thinking about kind of Marin as a whole, again, it presents both challenges and opportunities. And I came to this job after as you just heard, a very long and somewhat interesting career, moving in and out of government, moving in and out of the nonprofit sector. I've had lots of different jobs. Interestingly enough, I've never worked in the for-profit sector. So maybe that will be my next chapter. I certainly hope not, but you never know. And throughout that time, I was really quite fortunate to get all sorts of amazing experiences and opportunities. And throughout that time, I had a career progression, right? I got, you know, bigger jobs or bigger titles or more responsibility. And particularly the last 12 years when I was working for then President Obama and his administration, and then running a national/international environmental organization, I was really thinking at kind of very high levels about policy, right? And even in those, what some would say, you know, incredible moments when you're like in the Senate chambers, like, you know, talking about policy, or, you know, you're in the back rooms trying to kind of cut the last deal before the vote or whatever it may be. It was very, very apparent to me that the kind of genius of policy didn't start off in those rooms. They didn't necessarily even start off with the people in those rooms. They started off somewhere else. Let me tell you what I mean by that, and let me give you just a very concrete example of that. When you think about environmental policy, which is something that I know quite well, just because I spent a lot of my career working on it. We have in many cases, the best environmental laws of any nation on the globe. The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, all of these types of things, right? So when you think about where did those laws come from? You might, again, jump to the obvious answer, perhaps, is from DC, right? From legislation, from Congress, from the Senate, from presidents. And I would argue that's wrong. Because I would argue very strongly that it did not come from any of those places. It came from real places with real people dealing with real problems. Right? So the ushering of environmental law and regulation in this country happened around late 1960s, early 1970s. What was happening in the United States at the time? For those of you that can remember, right?
It's like a little, probably Kennedy's assassination, Bill's assassination.
Very tumultuous period of time, right? I remember as a kid, growing up in Colorado, we lived on a hill and I could see kind of the entire landscape of the city kind of while we're up on this hill. And there was always this very, very, very thick black cloud starting in the fall, going throughout the winter, right? It's just a thick black cloud that was in proximity to the coal-fired power plant that was generating all of the electricity for our community. So it was the reality that the pollution that we had created for all sorts of needs and reasons was actually having a manifest effect on millions of people in millions of ways, right? So whether it was Love Canal, where literally people were living next to toxic waste sites, or a woman opening up her patio door and literally witnessing birds falling down from the sky dead, or parents in LA County looking at the LA Times to try to figure out whether or not they were going to let their kid out to play soccer that afternoon, depending on the air quality. Right? These were things that people were living with. And these were things that people were sick about living with. Like literally sick, but also psychologically sick of having to live that way. Right? So this uprising that resulted in the creation of many environmental laws started from all of those places. From people standing up and saying, you know what? This is not good enough. This is not what it should be. It could be better. And that's what we want. Right? And coming together in collective action in the first, I think we just celebrated the anniversary of Earth Day, right? The first Earth Day was in 1970, right? Which arguably was directly connected to all of the environmental laws and regulations that were passed. And guess who passed them? Richard Nixon, right? Most people don't think of Richard Nixon as like the big environmental hero, and maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but he sure as heck knew where the electorate was, right? And the electorate was there. So I'm telling you all of these things because I am here, because I believe in here, right? I believe not only in Marin as a community and in the possibilities and the potential of Marin as a community, I believe in communities, right? I believe that communities actually are the locus point for innovation, for creativity, for the new ideas that will take us to the next 50 years. Where do leaders come from? They come from places. They get nurtured in places, right? So this kind of crucible that we have to deal with in community is the best kind of crucible to deal with, right? It's just really thinking about all of those opportunities. And frankly, because of what's happening on a federal level, the onus and the opportunity on communities is even greater, right? It's not just the onus because of what we're witnessing and how we're trying to figure out how to fill some of the gaps. It's the opportunity that is associated with thinking about not only how do we fill all the gaps, but how do we actually think about how to make it better, right? How to make the process better. Not just the outcome, the process moving forward. And I will just tell you, I just came from another meeting. We were with a bunch of county officials, and it's exactly the same thing that they're thinking about as well. Right? These are no times to further kick the can down the road. These are times to take up all those cans and really think about how we want to restack them. That makes sense. Okay, so I'm gonna go into my presentation now and give you a little bit of a flavor of the history of the Marin Community Foundation, kind of the then, the now, and the future. I recognize that there are many organizations, many individuals here that represent organizations that have been or are grantees of the Community Foundation. I also recognize there are many folks here that are probably kind of lifelong observers of what has transpired over the many decades with the Buck Trust and the Marin Community Foundation. So with all of that, my apologies in advance for repeating anything that you may or may not already know.
I've got.
She's got it. Yeah, we're all good.
Just checking, make sure.
Yeah, thank you. So we go to this slide. So I'm going to start just talking about a little bit about the history again, for those of you who are not as familiar with it. Slide. There we go. The name Buck is a very familiar name in places like this room and certainly throughout Marin County. Leonard and Beryl Buck were residents of Ross and were quite charitable during their lifetime, really spending a lot of time and their charitable dollars on activities that they were deeply vested in and deeply engaged in. Leonard passed before Beryl, and once Beryl passed, she did not have any direct heirs, and so her trust was essentially established and given to the San Francisco Foundation to steward. And I can only imagine that made a ton of sense at the time because there was no Marin Community Foundation, and the San Francisco Foundation was already a very established community foundation serving the Bay Area broadly. So they went to the San Francisco Foundation to steward the funds. It's notable the slides in particular talk a little bit about the financial assets that are associated with the trust. They were considerable given the time, right? $7 million back in 1975. Kind of what happened in this period of time as the trust was stewarded by the San Francisco Foundation was this kind of just huge increase in asset growth that was primarily attributed to the fact that most of the trust's holdings were in a single company, which was an oil and gas company that was bought in 1975 by Shell, greatly increasing the value of those shares. And if anybody, is a steward of understanding the oil and gas industry during that period of time, generally there was a lot of growth in that sector. And so those assets, while they have ultimately become invested in kind of diverse portfolios, the assets at the period of time that were associated with that oil and gas stock shot up considerably. And so, we at one point we're talking about a $7 million trust, and very quickly, jumped to the hundreds of millions of dollars. And so you had the San Francisco Foundation that was managing this trust on behalf of the wishes of Beryl Buck. And she did leave wishes in her will, a variety of different kind of senses of kind of what she wanted to try to accomplish with those funds and how she'd like those funds to accomplish those goals. The overarching, I think, direction for all of the things in her trust from Mrs. Buck, was that she really wanted the assets to benefit, in her words, the poor and needy of Marin County. She loved this county, she loved the people in this county, she loved the things that she had volunteered for, and the community organizations that she was a part of. And she wanted, again, her trusts to further benefit all of these things that she had spent so much of her life caring about. And so San Francisco Foundation administered this for I think maybe 6, maybe 8 years. And I was not around at the time, but apparently tried a lot of different things. And at a certain point in time, the leadership at the San Francisco Foundation decided, in short, and this is my paraphrasing, that Marin County was really wealthy and they didn't actually need this much resource. And San Francisco Foundation had obligations to a broad kind of 7-county Bay Area region. So let's start to try to distribute some of this money to other places. At which point they quickly were sued by a group of residents here in Marin County that basically cited breach of trust. And I was speaking to a gentleman at my table about the notable aspects of this court case. It is seen as one of the most important trust and estates case in kind of trust and estates law. And the reason why that is because it really clarified the power of donor intent. She was very clear what her intentions were, and it was very clear to the plaintiffs in that case, the residents of Marin, that the San Francisco Foundation had violated that trust. So they went to court and they had lots of battles, which apparently, according to Stephen, created a lot of opportunity for lawyers and a lot of opportunity for a lot of conversations, a lot of jockeying, a lot of whatnot here in the county. But the long and the short of it is that it resulted in a settlement. And the settlement itself created the Marin Community Foundation. So of the 900 community foundations across the country, we are probably the only community foundation that was created by court order. I don't know whether that's a badge of honor or not, but I'll take it. In creating the Marin Community Foundation, it was kind of a deep underscore into, we are going to follow the directives, right, in the trust, in terms of where these assets go. So what you may not know is from that settlement, there are 3 other organizations that were created. The Buck Institute for Aging is one, the Marin Institute for Education, which I think has changed its name, and Alcohol Justice, which I believe also has changed its name since it was first incorporated. So those 3, including the Marin Community Foundation, were the creations of this settlement, of the judge in this settlement. And we 4 collectively represent the entities that receive the distributions out of the Buck Trust. You may not know this, and it might be interesting to know that the management actually of the assets in the trust were also specifically delegated to Wells Fargo. So Wells Fargo is the investment trustee, as named in the court settlement, and so they continue to manage the assets. And the 4 entities, again, receive the distributions. The Marin Community Foundation receives, I think, the largest distribution, and we also receive the obligation, right, to redistribute those funds to other organizations that are serving individuals and organizations here in Marin County. So it's a fascinating history, and it's a history and legacy that lives very large to us, not only for the obvious reasons, but as an entity that was created to serve only one fund, We have grown significantly, so that we now have, I think, what was the statement, 850 funds that we manage on behalf of donors across the institution. And through all of those relationships and funds and individuals, again, we are really guided by this question and the reality of donor intent, right? So what are people interested in? What do they want to see? What are their greatest hopes? And how do we get them there? We have more discretion with the buck than we do perhaps with some of the other funds in the Marin Community Foundation kind of largesse. But I think it's important to know that our assets at this point are roughly 2/3 with the kind of 850 funds that we have on behalf of individuals and families, and 1/3 the Buck Trust. So it gives you kind of a picture of kind of what we look like perhaps from a financial perspective. So why don't we go to the next slide? Here we go. So this kind of just lays out in more granular fashion the amount of money that we have and the amount of grants that we do on an annual basis. These are large sums of money, and I definitely get that. And I think what's a little bit challenging when you see figures like this is to understand in some ways the restrictions that we have on most of that funding. So a lot of times we get into situations where people are like, well, you have all the money in the world, like you could fix that pothole. It's like, well, we actually don't. I mean, we steward this money, but we're stewarding it on behalf of many, many families and individuals that still retain the right to advise us on where that money should be invested philanthropically, right? So it's a complicated, it's more of a complicated picture than it could be perceived if you can just look at the top lines of the numbers. Next slide. So that kind of is by no means the conclusion of the history, the Marin Community Foundation. You know, I could go on about the different ways we've organized ourselves throughout that course of time since the court settlement in the late 80s. We have, like most institutions, right? We've tried certain things, we've tried other things, we've organized ourselves in this way, we've organized ourselves that way. And as an institution, I think we have grown and we have matured and we have learned from our own mistakes, which I think created a really amazing platform for me in particular when I walked in the door almost 4 years ago to really think about what next. And I was specifically hired to think about what's next. I mean, it was kind of like in the position description when they were trying to find a new president. It was like somebody who could really help the institution think about its future. So next slide. So I arrived at the Marin Community Foundation recognizing the enormity of the assets that we had, the enormity of the reputation, of the kind of deep connections that we had in communities, but also recognizing the fact that there was still a lot of unmet need and opportunity. And I really want to underscore that word opportunity. And what you see up here is a slide that reflects kind of where we landed after a very long strategic planning process that we engaged in a couple of years ago. When we actually kind of turned inward and asked ourselves, you know, the kind of questions that you ask yourself in a strategic planning process, like what do we think we want to prioritize and why? How do we do it? What are the trade-offs? What are the choices? So we asked ourselves all of those things that again are very traditional things within the context of strategic planning processes. What I want to mention that I think is quite notable and somewhat different about our strategic planning process is that, yes, it was a traditional strategic planning process in one sense of the word. On the other hand, it was a really profoundly important exercise for us to go through as an institution that's almost 40 years old. And the reason why it was a really important exercise for us to go through is that it forced us to ask the question of why do we exist? right? I mean, maybe that just seems obvious, like, why do you exist? Well, you exist to like steward money and to try to increase philanthropy and connect community opportunity and whatnot, but like, why here? Why us? And to what end? Right, they're actually pretty profound questions, and frankly, I think all organizations should be asking themselves those questions for both the obvious reasons and maybe not the obvious reasons. We're in a really fluid period of time. It's been fluid for almost 10 years in this country. Like, things are changing, norms are changing, right? Like, how do we figure out like what our mooring is? You figure out what your mooring is by figuring out what your values are, by figuring out what your vision is and figuring out what your mission is, right? So all of those things were really important things for us to accomplish as a foundation. And the kind of conclusion of what we wanted to do with that, once we answered some of those questions, were basically, we want to do more. We want to do more. And what I mean by that is the Marin Community Foundation has operated in Marin for almost 40 years under, you could argue, the larger guise of serving the poor and needy in Marin. So for us, I think it was an obligation to look ourselves in the mirror and ask ourselves the question, have we moved the needle? Have we moved the needle? Have we changed the rankings in terms of Marin being the most segregated county in the state of California? Have we changed that? Have we changed materially, any of the like major indicators of opportunity, whether economic opportunity, health, education, change that for the poorest in our communities? Has that moved? Maybe. Has it moved enough? No. So Marin is, again, super interesting, because when you ask yourself the question of where are the poor and needy, it's actually pretty obvious, even though it seems to not be obvious in so many ways. These 4 communities represent the poorest per capita aggregations of individuals in the county of Marin. So you have Marin City, you have the Canal District, you have West Marin, and you have mostly low-lying parts of Nevada, right? And that has perpetuated for many, many years. Marin City has been around since World War II, right? So the reason why we decided what you see on this slide is because we really felt like we had tried really fantastic educational initiatives. We had tried really important healthcare initiatives. We had tried really important early childhood, child care. We tried a lot of things, and all of those things are really important and continue to be important. But what if we try something different? What if we try an approach that looks at the community as a whole and actually brings us closer to those communities as a whole to figure out actually what those communities are prioritizing, as opposed to us prioritizing it for the communities, right? So it may seem like an obvious shift, but this is a profoundly different shift for us as an institution to move towards more of a geographic focus of grant making, and frankly, much more of a general approach to grant making. So in addition to these 4 areas being the communities of focus, the vast majority of our grant making now is general support, for the first time in the history of the Marin Community Foundation. When I came in, every grant was a 1-year grant. And I remember there's one organization in particular that was receiving 3 1-year grants from 3 different program areas at the foundation, from 3 different program directors. This is like a small organization, right? It's not like a big, gigantic, multi-million-dollar organization, small organization. I'm thinking, that just doesn't make sense. That guy is probably writing reports all the time as opposed to like doing the work in community. So like, how do we do this better? Like, how can we do this better? And for anybody who's been on the nonprofit side of the fundraising machine, you recognize how golden general support grants are, how even more golden general support multi-year grants are, right? Super, super rare. It's funny because when I started at the Hewlett Foundation, it was known as kind of best in class by the grantees in particular, because we gave multi-year general operating support. And through my 12 years or 11 years being at the Hewlett Foundation, we kind of went through this really interesting thing that happened in the philanthropic sector at the time that was much more about like, well, we should operate like the financial sector more. We want to know what the return on investment is, right? So we need to get logic models, we need to get like theories of change. You know, I remember like just haranguing an intern from an organization for like 8 months to like write a theory of change. And they were just like, we just don't even understand what you're talking about. So like, and the Hewlett had really shifted to, again, very project specific grant making. And I'm not actually not casting aspersions on either one, because there's a lot of foundations that still do project specific grant making. We still do some project specific grant making. It's not one's better than the other. But in a community like Marin, with the relatively small number of nonprofits that we're working with, general support grants are not just critical from a financial perspective, they're critical from a human capital perspective, right? Like, where can I spend my time in a way that matters the most? That's not about writing reports for a foundation, but about doing the work that the foundation is actually theoretically paying me to do, right? Or supporting me to do. So it was a big shift. Another big shift around our grant making was that we opened the kind of aperture. We had some criteria that was specifically referenced the inequity in Marin County, the 4 communities that we're focused on. But we just opened it up. Like, what are you doing? We wanted to learn. What do people think are the priorities in their community? And how are they addressing those priorities in their communities? I think out of that first cohort, of which we're now approaching the 2nd year of funding, something like 35% new grantees that had never received a grant before from the Marin Community Foundation. A lot of new organizations, a lot of smaller organizations, and a lot of learning that we were able to receive through the process, right? We got a sense of like, what does the community actually think is urgent right now? And what we learned probably is not going to be a surprise to you all. What we learned in particular, I'll just name one top line, is that the young people in our communities are not doing well, particularly after the pandemic, right? So a lot of mental health issues, a lot of instability, a lot of challenge, reintegrating back with school, grades, etc. So a lot of organizations really trying to focus on this population, this critical population in the county, and trying to figure out a variety of different ways to support them. And we are supporting a variety of different ways, whether it's arts organizations or after school organizations or homework, tutoring, mentoring organizations. We have them all. And it was an incredible, again, opportunity for us to learn from the community about what the priorities were, and for us to be able to do our grant making in a very fundamentally different way. So next slide. As I mentioned, in addition to the community power grant making, which is the grant making that I just described, it's the largest pot of grant making we do. It's general support multi-year. We have 2 other specific initiatives that we decided to undertake. And within these initiatives, the grants are very project specific. Because within these 2 initiatives, we have very, very specific outcomes that we're looking for. So just taking on homelessness and affordable housing, actually both homelessness and affordable housing and building resilient communities. When we did our strategic planning process, and we went out, we had community meetings, we had focus groups, we had meetings with our donors, meetings with stakeholders throughout the county. It was very clear. There's no debate about like, what are the top issues facing the county of Marin: affordable housing and homelessness and climate change. Like, everybody said the same thing. And so it's clear that these are really high priority issues. People are very, very nervous and worried about them. And so what we have tried to do is to ask ourselves a question of what can philanthropic capital do to move the needle in these areas significantly over a time limited period of time. We've given us 5 years to work on these 2 initiatives. In the affordable housing and homelessness category, for example, and I was just talking to somebody about this morning. You know, again, I'm gonna just go back to the kind of uniqueness of Marin that is unlike, in many ways, so many other parts of the Bay Area, where we do in fact have an unhoused problem. We do in fact have a homelessness problem, but it's a problem that you can actually get your arms around. And I mean that quite literally. It's a problem you can get your arms around because we actually know and have counted the individuals that are unhoused. I mean, I think off the top of my head, the last count was around 1,100. That's a tangible number. We literally know their names. We know where they are. And we're providing direct services to them to try to get them on the path of being permanently housed, right? So when you compare us, to example, even to say Santa Clara County, right? These numbers that we have here are doable, right? If we collectively said we will end homelessness in Marin County, we would be able to do it. There's absolutely no question in my mind. And you want to know why there's no question in my mind? Because we've already done it. We've already eliminated all veterans from being unhoused in the county of Marin. That's an incredible accomplishment. It's an incredible accomplishment because we have incredible providers working on the ground. We have an incredible set of government agencies working in tandem with those providers. We have an incredible bounty of philanthropic opportunity to serve that need and that opportunity, right? So I put that out as an example. It's only one, but I want you to really think about that. We have a tangibility that exists in Marin that you can't find in almost any other place, right? And it means that we can do things, we can accomplish things, not just things that get us to a baseline, but things that take us way beyond that. And I feel like the vision that we all collectively should have for this place that we love, this place that gives us so much, the place that nurtures us so much with connections with nature and all the rest, like we should aspire to give that back, right? And that's actually what we need for our future. It's absolutely a pivotal time in our country, and it absolutely is a pivotal time in Marin as well, right? So which path are we going to take? And how are we going to chart that path? And how big can we think? I want to think big, because I think the world demands that of us. And I also think it's absolutely and entirely possible here. So next slide. So I've already kind of delved into the what can be. So next slide. I think this was mentioned in the opening. This is our mission statement. It's really kind of trying to combine what we again believe is the kind of singular, unique, and enormous power that communities themselves have. So really trying to harness that and leverage the resources of philanthropy, right? To create the world that we all want to live in, to create the future that we actually need to make possible, right? Like who's going to make that future possible if not but for the people in this room, right? Or institutions like the Marin Community Foundation. So this is our mission statement. Next slide. When we think about kind of, again, these two twin kind of levers, right? Like this is just grist for the mill, right? Like how should we be thinking about harnessing the power of community? We just spent, you know, the early part of this meeting talking about community and what it means to us. Like how do we unleash that more? How do we organize that more? What would that look like in Ocasio Valley? Right? Because you guys do a really good job out there, West. You do. What would that look like 10 manifold, right? What would that look like in Southern Marin? What would that look like in Nevada? What would that look like if it all came together? Right? If all of these little villages, associations. So this kind of question of how we can really harness what's already there and how we can nurture what's already there, right? I mean, it's just, it's just an incredible opportunity, right? And there's just so much beauty and joy and genuine satisfaction out of that. I mean, like, I have the best job in the world, and that's why, because it's just about people and places, right? Real people in real places. And then the resources of philanthropy, again, for us as an institution, it's like, how do we harness, it's not just the Buck Trust, right? The third of the 2/3 now that represent the corpus of the Marin Community Foundation, it's about the 850 funds. How do we think about those 850 funds without, violating donor intent, right? The cardinal rule, right? It's about having more conversations with our donors about the world that we live in, about the things that they want to accomplish, and about how they can best accomplish that. I'm going to just take a little bit of a detour because I want to tell you something that is such a frustration to me. And it's not just to me at the Marin Community Foundation, it's to me as one of 900 leaders of community foundations across the country. Community foundations are very old, they're very old institutions, right? I think it's some of the oldest philanthropic institutions in the country. And the vast majority, all the community foundations have a business model. And the business model is based on assets under management, right? So for a long time, it's very, very financial, right? So a long time it was just like, how do we get more assets under management? And then you're kind of like in these meetings with other foundations, like, how big are your assets, right? Like, it's like the whole thing of like, you just want more assets. Like, I think that is actually completely flipped. We don't want to be sitting on assets. We want those assets to be in action, right? These assets are philanthropic assets. They've already been deemed so by the IRS. We want those assets to go to work, right? So again, we're trying to encourage donors to do smarter, to do better, and to do more grant making with the resources that they are able to direct. And again, if this is not time to really buckle down and try to do that, I'm not sure what other time there would be, right, with this level of kind of urgency and frankly opportunity. So with that, I would love to just open it up to have a conversation about like literally anything that I've just talked about, but to specifically kind of have a conversation about like, how do we come together as a community and realize our power and realize our vision of what we want Marin to truly be in the future? How do we collectively work together around that? How do we collectively work together to garner more resources, right? To be put in action around the things that we believe are necessary and beautiful and critical for all of the things that we care about. And how can we, as the community foundation of note here in the county, be a better service to all of you? So with those big questions, let me just stop and open it up. And looks like I've got some hands over there already. So thank you.
All right, while you're thinking of your questions, and I'll come around with the microphone, I just have to plug us. I was listening to the introductory topic of community and building community, and there were some great comments and observations from the audience. And I didn't share mine, but I'm going to give it to you now, which is, this is community building. I mean, Marin Coalition, this is what we do. And we have representatives here, for example, from Marine Mammal Center, Wild Care, International Bird Rescue. You were talking about the environmental community. We had a program a couple of years ago where we had representatives from those 3 wildlife rehabilitation centers at our podium and had a conversation about that topic under the banner of Marin Coalition. So I'm kind of inspired by the concept that you've raised and the fact that we kind of fit under that heading already in terms of what we do here at Marin Coalition. So I just kind of had to point that out because I'm thinking about your topic and feeling pretty proud of what this organization is doing, including today, having this program to talk about MCF and everything that you've been hearing so far today. So, all right, that's the end of my little plug. Let's get to your questions.
Hi, I'm wondering if what's next could include a substantial capital investment, say in the rebuilding and renovation of Golden Gate Village. That's 150 million, which is a sliver compared to 4 or 3.5 billion. And I just think if you really want to walk the walk on thinking big, I think it's a capital investment that we need to ask for. And I think it would be fair, the reparations, and I think Marin City should come first. They were the only people who were denied the opportunity to purchase homes after World War II. And because of that, I think the foundation could put them first. It's a comment, not so much a question, but thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. We can go around.
I'm from Fairfax and our homeless population is a big topic going on. But the concept of talking to our neighboring towns, I've never heard that brought up in our conversations. It's all what we in Fairfax are doing with our homeless. So the idea that we might be talking, maybe if we do talk about the county as being a bigger entity and maybe they've got services that we don't have or something like that. What do you think you all might do, or what should we do to get the conversation about a larger community solving a common problem?
It's a great question. I don't have a ready answer for you yet, although I will just underscore, we have spent a lot of time thinking about that. And it's everything from what you could call just the more pedestrian, like how do we just get people together that live in different parts of the county, right? Just to like start to build some of those social bonds. But it is also within the context of like, how do we get municipalities to understand what other municipalities are doing and to learn from them. I mean, like, climate resilience is a big example of that, where, some communities are kind of going on their own, and yet they're not talking to the county about what the county's doing, and they're not necessarily recognizing that the city 3 up from them, right, is also doing the same thing. And there's like a kind of missed set of opportunities there, right? So we're thinking about it from multiple levels. We're thinking about it from like a government level. We're thinking about it from an individual level. And just really open to ideas, because I do think it's an opportunity for sure.
Question over here.
Hi, Rhea. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Dr. Sunny Ivy from UC Berkeley, and I support Marin City Climate Resilience. So my question is, what are your thoughts on investing in community academic partnerships? So we've successfully carried out a case study this spring. One of my students is here. Raise your hand, Alicia. Okay, and so she's done some research on city incorporation, and that research would not have been done without this partnership. So how do we harness the student body in the Bay Area at large, or here at Dominican, to support some of these communities? Do you have any interest in that?
I think there's absolute interest in it. I mean, I don't think that we have a specific program. Again, a lot of I mean, I guess if you're talking about our climate resilience work, a lot of that is public-private partnership. A lot of it is already kind of highly influenced by academic institutions that have done the research, et cetera, to figure out like the mapping and zoning and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So there's certainly no bias against it. In terms of perhaps the other piece of your question is like, how do you kind of try to nurture that more? It's a good question, right? And it's really about how to harness the power of different kinds of institutions. And if you just want to take Marin specifically, the power of Dominican and the power of the College of Marin, right? To really be thinking about like, how do you get both like really great research from these really great institutions and the kind of collaboration of the teachers and the students, right? To be part of something that is directly relevant and tangible to the places that we all live, right? So we're very, very open to it. And I think, again, just would love any ideas about how to further that.
Okay, we got a couple questions over here. Start with Susan.
Thank you for your comments. So like you, I've spent almost my whole career in education and nonprofit kinds of work, so it's refreshing to hear what is happening now at the Marin Community Foundation. To give context to my question now, I'm currently paying a lot of attention to affordable housing, which is a really strong interest of mine and the group that I work with, Catalyst for Local Control. And I love what you're saying about community, and I like the opening comments about that and the responses to that. And I so appreciate your background in environmentalism. But what I've also been paying attention to is what's happening at the state level. So I'll get around to my question to you about that. At the state level, as we sit here today, there's over 125 housing bills. A majority of those bills are either looking to take away local control, which would be another way of saying they're taking away community voices for how communities wish to live into their mission and their values and their dreams, and that's being eliminated by Sacramento laws. And the other thing, maybe almost the other half of those bills are bills that are eliminating CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, and the requirement to have environmental impact reports on projects that would be like 7-story buildings being eligible for any of our residential neighborhoods. So my question is, like, are you in the foundation paying any attention to building bridges to what's happening at the state level, which is a top-down, not a grassroots approach to affordable housing?
So we are very much aware and paying attention to all of those dynamics for sure. And I think you're right. And I'm just gonna paraphrase, so you push back if this is not the right way of paraphrasing. You know, it's a you know, we're seeing kind of the attempt of the state to quote unquote fix the enormous challenge of trying to produce more affordable housing for the state of California by superseding a bunch of different policies or processes or doctrines, right, that have been occurring. And we're seeing communities feeling very victimized, right, or kind of thrown about like the consequences of that and the requirements associated with that. So we're certainly bearing witness to all of that. I guess what I mean, there's so many things to say, is the following. I don't think that state pressure is going to alleviate anytime soon, right? Like you just mentioned, however many bills, is probably a record number of bills. And last session probably had another record number of bills, right? So this is a huge and very keen topic of all of the governing bodies, right, of the state of California, including obviously the governor's office. So the question then becomes like, how can we within community try to, I would argue, get ahead of that, right? Like if we don't want their plan, what's our plan? Right? So like, what is our plan? Have we figured out a plan? I mean, I'm spending a lot of time with the on this topic and with the county really talking about, you know, the challenge of trying to get things built where people don't want them built for a variety of different legitimate reasons, right? And, you know, part of, I think, that challenge is like, do we have a roadmap that's been developed with community, by community, of like what it is we actually think we want this to look like? If we all agree that affordable housing is a challenge, if we all can agree that like, wouldn't it be great if like more families could live here? wouldn't it be better if 67% of our workforce didn't have to commute into Marin from, Sonoma County or from Solano County, right? If those things are things that we can agree on, if we can agree that like we need more affordable housing, then can we create a process that will help us identify where we actually think affordable housing is appropriate, right? So it's more of a like, how do we create opportunities for both local communities and for the county as a whole to really think about what is the roadmap for the future that will get us to where we want to go in a way that we want to get there, right? So that we aren't kind of at the mercy of a variety of different, state regulations or laws or mandates.
So just to say, in Mill Valley, in Mill Valley, there was a plan put together for how ADUs, the accessory dwelling units, could have met a need for housing in Mill Valley that would have had assurances of affordability and parking and other amenities. And when the laws were passed in Sacramento, it totally undid like years of effort that had gone into it. So it's not just Mill Valley, other communities too have done the careful planning, and those plans are being railroaded out of existence for the power that the state has taken over. But there are plans.
So let's do more plans. I mean, ADUs, I'm not familiar with what you have just described, but ADUs, really are thought of kind of as the cheapest, fastest, easiest way to get more affordable housing, right? And how, individual municipalities are approaching it also differs, right? In terms of are folks open to it or are folks not open to it, right? Are they doing it for the right reasons or kind of not really doing it for the right reasons? So again, trying to figure out a way to both help individual municipalities, but then, this is a problem that affects us all, right? So yes, based on the state mandates, there's a particular number of units per municipality, right, that's come down. But I think it's a better problem to solve in aggregate, right? Particularly when, a lot of people are increasingly talking about trying to focus, development along a corridor that makes sense, right? So like the 101 corridor, for example. So if that's the case, it involves a lot of municipalities coming together to try to figure out like, how does that make the most sense, right? And what is it that we have to give up, or what is it that we gain from being part of a larger conversation to get to these numbers overall? I think that's turning the table on the state in a powerful way. And I just think it again, either what's that it's not an analogy or a joke, like either you're like being served at lunch or you're eating lunch, right? Like whatever it is, right? Like, again, the power, we have the power, right? And we've certainly demonstrated after many, many decades of really amazing organizing that's happened here throughout the county on lots of different things that we can be organized. So can we get ourselves organized around, again, what's the future that we want?
Hi, Rhea. Thank you. I'm Doug Eisinger. We met earlier, and I'm with Town Books, which is the Friends of the San Anselmo Public Library. My question is, could we work with your staff as a brain trust, or as a consulting support? And I'm asking this, broadly, but I'll give you a specific example of why I'm thinking about this. We have a somewhat time-sensitive request from our town to support a library renovation. We have only a certain amount of limited funding, and we're thinking there are creative options that must be out there to seek matching grants from other foundations, to perhaps loan the town the money. But with all the different possibilities out there, it would be great to get some professional advice from a seasoned team at MCF that frequently has to deal with looking for matchmaking and helping support complicated projects. So is that something that you would envision helping our organization and other organizations do, is to sit down and look at what's the problem we're trying to solve? And even if you're not giving us financial support, which of course everybody would welcome, would you be able to say, here's a roadmap, or here we can help you find the foundations that we think make grants in your area so that you can get a head start on trying to find matching support?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, the answer is yes. Generally, it's absolutely yes. And what I think is interesting about it is that well, we don't have any of our kind of program staff, the grant making staff here with us today. I would argue that the vast majorities of time that they spend in their jobs are not about giving grants or managing grants, it's about giving advice. Right? And it's not just to the grantees, it's advice that comes in on a daily basis from lots of different places, right? And so I think it is it's a real tenet of what we think we contribute to the community, beyond the financial resources, and frankly, we'd like to hope that like the contribution that we offer is beyond the financial kind of checks. So it is definitely something that we have done in the past. It's something that we continue to do. As I mentioned to you, my Chief Communications Officer, Vicki Garrod, is here, has provided literally probably hundreds, if not thousands of hours of kind of pro bono consulting to organizations trying to figure out how to put up websites, organizations trying to figure out how to market a new development campaign. You know, she's the top of her game in the profession and is incredibly sophisticated about the kind of advice that she gives, and she gives it freely when she has the time, most certainly, and she makes the time for it. So it's a value. It's a part of how we think about our work, and so yes, absolutely.
Okay, Vicky, you better run now.
Taking orders.
Question? All right, I thought I saw hands. Okay.
See if I can form this question. A typical structure for you, I suspect, is somewhat passive. That is, organizations come to you for funds and you determine whether or not what they want to do fits the mold of how the donors have advised those funds should be spent. Have you thought about thinking a little bit out of the box? You mentioned an example of housing, for instance, up and down the corridor, or how it must be used, and that requires multiple organizations to work together. Typically, it's hard to make that happen. And I'm wondering about Marin Community Foundation actually being the catalyst for such an organization, putting that organization together to then address a certain problem that crosses over multiple organizations.
So I think I'm following you. I guess I will say, I don't think it's generally good practice for philanthropy to start new organizations. I've seen it a lot in my career, and it tends to be quite challenging, both because oftentimes there are already organizations that exist in similar spaces, and so you create this kind of competition model that folks, you know, rightly get upset about. I also think you create a little bit of a jeopardy for the organization starting off, because they're almost solely funded by a single donor versus like having a diverse donor base, right? So just kind of the long-term longevity. So I don't think it's a great idea to start an organization, but I think it's a great idea for a foundation to come up with an idea and organize a group of organizations around that idea, and to develop that idea then in a kind of mutual and kind of common and collaborative way, and then to try to attract resources to it, right? So let me give you an example of something, maybe two examples of work that we've done in the past couple of years. We have a group of donors that have been very, very interested in reproductive rights nationally, perhaps for obvious reasons. So they've been funding at pretty significant levels the kind of major groups working on reproductive rights. And so we got those donors together to ask them, like, you know, what are the things that, like, what are the things that are kind of compelling you to give in this area? Like, what are you actually trying to accomplish, and what do you hope for? And all of their answers were generally the same. They're really trying to figure out how to meet the need, and actually how to just help women that are looking for help and services, right? And so with that group of very different donors, but with common interests, right? We kind of organize them into a process of really thinking about like, well, what could be a strategy to pool your money together, right? To fund organizations that you might not have already, or you might not have ever thought of, right? But if you want to know where the need is, we can do some research about the need, right? And if you, again, just in terms of the issue area, right, the need generally is in states that have taken the right away from women for reproductive care, right? So you're looking at specific states. You're trying to figure out like where those women in those states are actually going for care, right? So then you're looking at another set of specific states. And then you're trying to go deeper into like, okay, what are the organizations on the ground in both places, right, that are helping? And what are the organizations on the ground that are actually rooted in the ground, that are part of the community, right? So like, come here, come there, those organizations are just always gonna be there because they've always been there, right? So we put together a whole strategy for donors to consider around how they could use their philanthropic capital in an area of interest that they've already committed to in a collaborative way around achieving impact in a very specific, focalized set of opportunities. And they were really excited about it. So that's a kind of that's the type of effort that we are trying to frankly do more of, is like, how do we actually activate the kind of mutuality of common interests, whether it's about reproductive rights or early childhood education, or environmental conservation or climate change, what have you, right? We have a number of donors that care about those things, and trying to just get those donors together and have conversations about like, what do you actually want to accomplish is a really good way to start that conversation. So
helping multiple small communities become one larger community.
absolutely, right? Absolutely. I mean, we're now connected to communities in, the deep south and in the Midwest that we would not have been connected to. But for these efforts, right? And now they're part of our community as well, for sure.
One more question here. We're getting close, so can take one or two more.
Just a quick question. I'm a systems person. How in the world do you keep track of all of those different organizations, donors and projects and people who want money?
Because I have an amazing set of colleagues like Ebony Marshall, who works with, aggregate groups of those donors, who know those donors well, who, have oftentimes kind of sit at kitchen tables with those donors. It's steep work, and it's not work that I, in any stretch of the imagination, could do myself, but I feel very, very fortunate to just have an incredible group of individuals at the foundation that care as deeply about the people within the foundation, the people that we serve from the foundation, both in terms of the donors that we have relationships with and the community generally that we have relationships with.
Okay, real quick over here. Hope it's a short one.
It is. Does the Marin Community Foundation have flexibility in the percentage of the endowment that they give away? I know by law you have to give 5%. But during the pandemic, some foundations increased that percentage. So I'm curious, is that a possibility here in Marin?
So it's interesting because we are not required by law to give for 5%. We're a public charity, so we're a nonprofit public charity, 501c3. We're not an independent foundation. So independent foundations have that restriction where they have to give 5% out a year. Community foundations do not. And interestingly enough, community foundations give out orders of magnitude more than that. I mean, I think last year our payout was about 22%. So we don't want to be restricted at 5%. Like, we're way above that already. And I'm complaining a couple of different things there, so sorry. But the other answer to your question is there is a restriction on how much we get every year as a distribution from the trust. And that was restricted by the judge in the settlement. Yeah.
That's because that cleared up the question I always had.
All right, let's thank Rhea. Just one or two little things before you all go. First of all, there's fruit out there. It's always left over, so please take some home. Secondly, as I said, if you're not on our list and would like to get announcements, just stop by and give one of us your email. No one sees it but us. We don't give it out, so you won't get spam. And lastly, just to remind you, we have our program archives on the website. So every program we do is recorded. It's available for your viewing on marincoalition.org in the archives. And, you know, again, getting back to this building community, I mean, that's what we do. And which mic do I use? I don't know. That's what we do. And you'll be able to see on our archives, we've done programs on homelessness, we've done programs on environment, we've done programs on local politics with Great Rock Bank. We've done programs on wildfire prevention, nonprofit organizations in Marin. So what we try to do is cover the waterfront in terms of community issues here in the county. And there's this whole archive of programs that if you didn't get there and you have a free afternoon, you can peruse that. Thank you all for coming, and we'll keep you posted for the next program.